Hi team, today we will be discussing how we need to adapt to our changing geopolitical environment. And I've been made aware that you all have analyzed the 5 forces in our airline industry, and I am more than eager to hear what you all have to say. Haley, would you please start us off with competitive rivalry?
Competitive rivalry in the airline and transportation industry is very high, mainly because companies have high costs and offer very similar services. Airlines spend a lot of money on planes, fuels, and employees, so they need to keep their flights as full as possible. If seats on the plane go empty, they lose money, which is why airlines often lower prices at the last minute. Since most airlines provide a similar experience, especially in economy class, customers usually choose based on price and schedule. This leads to constant price competition, especially because people can easily compare tickets using apps like Google Flights and Skyscanner. Major airlines such as Delta Airlines, United Airlines, and American Airlines are always competing with each other by adjusting prices, adding new routes, and offering reward programs to keep customers loyal. Some airlines try to stand out by offering cheap tickets, while others focus on better service or more comfortable experiences. But competition is still very strong. This rivalry also exists in other parts of transportation. For example, ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft compete heavily by lowering prices and improving convenience. Airlines also face pressure from suppliers like Boeing and Airbus, since there are only a few companies that make airlines, giving those suppliers more power. While there are not many strong alternatives to flying for long-distance, options like trains can compete in shorter trips. Overall, the airline industry is highly competitive because companies are always trying to attract the same customers while dealing with high costs, making rivalry one of the biggest forces shaping industry. Competitors find new ways to stand out, meaning that only the most efficient, innovative, and well-managed companies are able to succeed in such a challenging and competitive industry.
Alright, so now I'm going to go over my part, which is the threat of substitutes and how it affects airlines, and especially managers at airlines. Basically, the threat of substitutes just means how easy it is for customers to switch to something else that does the same thing. For airlines, that could be driving, taking a train or bus, or even just not traveling at all and using a form of virtual communication like Zoom instead. It really depends on things like price, convenience, and how far someone is traveling. What makes this really important is the energy side of things. Airlines depend a lot on jet fuel, and when fuel prices go up, usually because of geopolitical stuff like conflicts or supply issues, their costs go up too. So then, airlines raise ticket prices to make up for it. And since fuel is such a big part of their costs, even small changes can have a big impact on ticket prices. The problem is, when prices go up, people start looking for alternatives. A CNN article explains that rising jet fuel prices are already pushing airfares higher, and it's only expected to continue. So from a manager's perspective, it's kind of a balancing act. Like they need to cover their costs, but if they raise prices too much, people just won't fly, especially for shorter trips where driving might be cheaper or easier. Another source from Tech Explorer also talks about how higher fuel costs are leading to higher fares, which makes substitutes more appealing. So that just increases the competition without it being another airline, because they're competing with completely different types of transportation. And it's not just physical travel either. Business travel has gone down a lot because of virtual meetings, so now managers also have to deal with the fact that some people just don't need to fly anymore. That's especially important because business travelers used to be one of the most profitable groups for airlines. Because of all this, managers have to constantly adjust their strategies. That can mean focusing more on long-distance flights where substitutes are weaker, improving customer experience, or using pricing strategies to stay competitive. So overall, the threat of substitutes is pretty strong, especially for shorter trips. And for managers, the main thing is they have to constantly adjust pricing and strategy based on fuel costs and customer behavior, or they risk losing demand to these alternatives. Thank you guys for listening, and now I'm going to pass it off to Lucas.
Threat of new entrants in the airline industries are important specifically for managers because of how they have to handle when a new company wants to enter the industry. Because an airline is such an expensive company to run, that means that any new entrant could mean a big loss for a company like Delta or JetBlue. And they have to be ready to handle these things and make sure their company can stay growing and can stay profitable. One way that they'll do this is with things like loyalty programs where customers can earn points for every flight they go on. Like if you take a flight from Massachusetts to Florida, you can earn however many points they offer that you can later use to maybe get a free flight or get like a better seat, an upgraded seat on the flight. Another thing they'll do is analyze the type of clients they have. So most airlines will group their customers into 3 different pools: corporate clients, frequent business flyers, and occasional flyers. Corporate clients are companies who are sending people on planes every day, and you know they're going to have your business because they already have so many points and so many hours invested into one airline most of the time. Frequent flyers are individuals who usually fly like once or twice for work. Maybe this is a business owner or someone else who is constantly going back and forth. Occasional flyers are, for an example, a family that goes on vacation once a year and maybe they have one other flight within the household during that year. They're not flying much at all. So airlines will group these customers into these pools and then analyze which flights are being used most by the people who are spending the most money. For example, again, that flight from Massachusetts to Florida, if that's a flight that not a lot of corporate clients are using, that flight would be worth less points than a flight, let's say, from Massachusetts to Texas, where a lot of corporate headquarters are located. On top of that, managers have to realize where the line is between offering enough in these loyalty programs to keep their customers loyal, but not undercutting what they're giving out. Well, what I mean by that is if they're offering too much with these loyalty programs just to keep their customers loyal, then they're losing out on profits for an entirely different reason. Because now they're giving away too much free stuff and possibly too many free flights or too many discounted flights that even if they keep the same amount of customers, they're going to lose out on profits. Managers are constantly making decisions like this for airlines because the threat of new entrants is so powerful in such an expensive industry that they have to make sure that they're always evolving and always adapting how they do things so their customers will not leave them.
Geopolitical changes are impacting the airline and the air transportation industry. One of the biggest impacts comes from global conflicts and trade tensions from different countries. For example, in the Middle East, because of recent conflicts, airlines have seen a big increase in oil prices. Fuel now makes up about 25 to 30% of an airline company's cost. So this means that even if oil increases a small bit, this can determine or influence whether airline companies are profitable or not. Companies like JetBlue are struggling to stay profitable because of this. Airlines depend on a few number of manufacturers, such as Boeing and Airbus. Because there are a few options, these companies have strong control over pricing and delivery time. At the same time, fuel suppliers also have high power since airlines cannot control global air prices. For example, Air France had to cut back its growth plans because of a multi-billion-dollar deal that increased because of fuel prices. Because of this, the airline industry is facing higher costs, more financial pressure, and less flexibility. To respond to this, airlines are investing in fuel-efficient planes using long-term fuel contracts and even adding fuel surcharges to ticket prices to offset costs. Managers are no longer just focused on daily operations. They need to constantly monitor global events, adjust flight routes quickly, and make financial decisions under pressure quickly. For example, if airspace is restricted due to conflict, managers must reroute flights immediately while minimizing delays and costs. Future managers will need strong strategic thinking, global awareness, and the ability to adapt quickly. Leadership and communication skills are also critical, especially when guiding teams through uncertainty. I expect this industry to be fast-paced and unpredictable. Success will be dependent on being how proactive you are, making quick decisions, and managing supplier relationships effectively in a changing global environment.
The ongoing geopolitical tensions involving Iran have disrupted global oil supply and increased the cost of petroleum-based products, including aviation fuel. Jet fuel prices have risen sharply, in some cases nearly doubling, creating a major cost burden for airlines. Since fuel makes up roughly a quarter to a third of airline expenses, companies have responded by raising ticket prices across the board. This has a direct impact on customer bargaining power. For international travel, customers have very few realistic alternatives. Airplanes are the only practical way to travel long distances quickly. So even as prices increased, most consumers still choose to fly. This lack of substitutes results in low bargaining power. For domestic travel, customers have slightly more flexibility. They can choose to drive or use rail services like Amtrak. However, these options are often slower and less practical for time-sensitive trips, especially for business travel. As a result, bargaining power in domestic markets is only moderate at best. Another key factor is demand. Air travel demand is relatively inelastic, meaning people continue to buy tickets even when prices rise. This allows airlines to pass increased fuel costs directly onto consumers without losing significant demand. At the same time, competition within the airline industry is weakened. Financial struggles among low-cost carriers, such as Spirit Airlines, reduce pricing pressure. When fewer budget options are available, ticket prices tend to increase. Airlines have also responded by cutting routes and reducing flight frequency, effectively limiting the number of available seats. The restriction of supply further strengthens airline pricing power. Overall, rising fuel costs, limited alternatives, inelastic demand, and reduced competition all contribute to lower customer bargaining power in the airline industry.
Thank you all for your time and input, and this was a very helpful analysis, and I hope to talk to you all soon. Bye.